What is going on, everybody? Phil Swanson back again with another episode of the Go Lead Everything podcast, aka GLE. On today's show, I have a guy that I met online, not online dating, but we met online. I've been following this guy for a little while, and he's really intrigued me because he's got a very unique perspective, one that I resonate a lot with, and I thought it would be really great to bring him on here, get to know him better, and share him with all of you. So real excited for a real conversation today. We've got a couple different show formats. Sometimes I do Real Truths, which are solo episodes where I talk about something I think is really important for you to think about and implement in your personal life. We also have what we have today. Kind of, you can think of it as a traditional interview, but more just a conversation where I like to get to know cool people and share them with you. We also have some gear. So if you haven't grabbed some gear yet, head over to goleadeverything.com/gear and grab some gear. And if you haven't subscribed yet, head on over to YouTube and give us a subscribe. We're growing the show this year, already creeping up on 400 subscribers. Pretty cool. And continuing to grow that rapidly. So jumping into the show today, we have a husband, father, health and fitness guy that, you know, I could tell he's into health and fitness. You know, I don't have a bio on him because, you know, he's just more of the type of everyday guy that you would see on social media. At least that's kind of my perception of him. I actually just added him on LinkedIn for the first time 2 seconds before the show. And, you know, we interact mostly on Facebook. If you want to go follow him, head over to Brian Alexander on Facebook. But, you know, I love his faith mindset. I love his business mindset. And he is a business management consultant. And I'm really excited to learn his story. Brian Alexander, welcome to GLE.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm excited for this. I'm fired up from that intro, too.
Well, usually I have a more prepared remarks. So, hey, you get to give your own intro. Tell us your story, man. How did you become a management consultant and owning your own business?
That's you know, I guess I can go back depending on how far you want me to go back. But I guess you can go back to, let's see here. I ran and operated my own bar and lounge in the dining district of Chicago, Randolph Street. It's one of the dining districts way back when I was like 23. I invested a ton of money with my friends at the time, and they completely robbed me. They didn't pay their taxes. They were embezzling money, and I lost all of that money at the age of 23. Really expensive life lesson. Shattered all that I knew about good and evil. Stuck with the bag of the debt from that thing, and it was just like done and gone. Like overnight, right? And there was nothing I could do about it, nothing I could do to save it. It was just over. And so that was like the beginning of my entrepreneur journey. And as bad and as much as that actually hurt to go through, I learned so much about just running a business, leading people, being creative and kind of solving business problems and all of that. And that was what really kind of lit the fire under my behind to become an entrepreneur. But because of that, I was left with nothing and a massive amount of debt. So I went into the corporate world. In the corporate world, I went into, it was phone sales. It was smile and dial. It was call 60 people a day. I don't care if they want to talk to you or not. I was terrible at it. But I needed to make money, right? I needed to grow up and kind of, you know, make money and become a man. At the time I was 25. And so I did it. I sucked for a couple of years, but I ended up learning how to become a good salesperson. And I grew to the top 10% of that company. It was a Fortune 30 technology company. We sold, you know, business to business, CDW. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Another amazing experience. I learned a lot. I grew a lot from there, and ended up opening a CrossFit gym.
Oh, wow.
Like a side hobby during that.
I thought you were just a fit guy. I didn't know you were actually a fitness guy.
No, and this leads into like, you know, the genesis of how I got into, you know, business coaching as well. But ended up opening a CrossFit gym as a hobby for my wife. I'll put that in quotations because she never wanted it. But I had a full-time job at the time and I was doing well, and I wanted something for her, and I wanted something for her more than she wanted it for herself. And but it ended up doing really well. It came to a point where there was a lot of change at the corporate job, and a new director had shifted from a different vertical into my vertical, which was healthcare. And he'd been there 20 years, comp changes happening. And, he just sat me and my partner down at the time. We grew our book of business from like 3 million to 35 million after, 6 or 7 years of doing it. Sat us down, and we had to be, I don't know, 28, 27. We were young.
Wow.
Maybe 28. And he's like, look, you guys are making a shitload of money, if you don't mind my language. He's like,
yeah, go for it, man. Don't bother me.
We were upset about the comp changes, and the way he was leading us was terrible. And he sat us down in his office, and I'll never forget it. He said, you're not going anywhere. You're getting married to your wives next year. You're going to have kids. You have a mortgage. Like, I know you're not going anywhere. And it was that moment where I understood terrible leadership, and how to deliver bad news and how not to do it. But I made the decision I was just going to leave that job. And it's that moment, right? So I had the CrossFit gym running on the side, and it was growing and doing really well. And I decided to leave a career that I was making, almost 300 grand a year. And it was just climbing little by little by little. In retrospect, it might've been a little, I would say a little bit of an overreaction, but I'm a very emotional guy, and I was a lot younger, and I had a bigger ego and all that fun stuff. But it ended up working out because I went all in on myself, all in on the gym, and back against the wall, right? I couldn't fail. And we ended up doing really well with the gyms, to a point where I started mentoring other gym owners, because gym owners are terrible business people. They're very passionate about helping people, but they know nothing about business. So we taught them systems and processes and SOPs and hiring and you name it. Right. And that's the genesis of how I got into both entrepreneurship and then business coaching.
Wow. That's quite the story.
Long
so
story.
You burned the boats. You went full David Goggins and burned the boats going into business.
I burned the boats. And actually there was a micro story of burning the boats within that CDW episode that I can share, because I think that was where I understood the power of going all in on something. And so when we were at CDW, we were managing, in the beginning, early stages, managing probably 500 accounts. And it's smiling and dialing. You're trying to figure out who's the big account, who's not the big account, who has potential, who might buy. And it was just little by little. I'm like, man, this is just crazy. I got to figure out like how to get down to as little accounts as possible, but focus on the ones with the biggest potential, like the ones that could spend 5 million or 10 million a year with me. I don't want 100 accounts that could spend, 200,000 with me. I'd rather just focus on the big fish and find the lever on that big fish, essentially, that I can just pull and then, allow the flow to turn on. So through CDW, I learned the value of burning the boats. Ended up identifying basically 20 accounts that were like, okay, these are feeding me right now, but these 15, I'm going to focus on growing because these have the biggest potential. And I remember emailing my manager with that exact story, burn the boats. I explained it all. I'm like, look, I don't want 100 accounts. I just want 20. And he's like, wow. Are you sure? I'm like, I'm positive. I'm like, I can't even focus with 100 accounts. Like, there's no way I can do all of those accounts well. And if I'm going to put my time and energy and soul into something, it's going to be the ones that can yield the biggest reward, right? And that was a burn the boats lesson in my life. So I'm a big believer in that. It's scary as all hell, but I think it's necessary.
I agree with you. I agree. I think whether you can do it mentally to yourself, I think it's challenging for people to be able to do that. Like the guys like Andy Frisella talk about the zero options mentality. And I agree with it. It's that burn the boats mentality. I think very few are able to self-impose that just mentally on themselves. And they really have to, if they really want it and they want to go for it, they have to put themselves in a situation where they have to do it. And the reason I say that is because I learned the lesson. You mentioned me at 23 and learning a lesson. I learned shortly after my college tenure. I always thought I was a disciplined guy, Brian. And I was like the team captain of baseball, football, basketball through high school, baseball captain in college. And, I was the guy that was pushing everybody at 5:30 a.m. when we were showing up for lifting to like get motivated and get people, in the right mindset for lifting. But what I realized when I got out is the only reason I was doing that, Brian, it wasn't because I was disciplined. It was because I felt like I had a responsibility as a captain, and I like owed it to those guys to show up and be that example. And then when it was just me on my own as a young mid-20s guy, I let all that go. I completely fell off the wagon. And honestly, I didn't learn the lesson and realize this until my early 30s, that, I hadn't built discipline in my life. I thought I was a disciplined guy, but I wasn't. And so I'm still learning that myself, but I agree. I 100% agree with the concept of burning the boats. It's pretty cool. You learned that lesson at 23. What were you doing before that? What were you doing just before 23 years old when you started that first business?
So, well, 23 when I was at the corporate job, right? So my first business was the restaurant and lounge.
Yeah. So what were you doing? What were you doing before you started that? What made you jump into that?
It was just I was working at like a local high-end audio and appliance store, local appliance store. Had been there for some time, and I just had a group of friends who were not necessarily the best people to surround yourself with. Mm-hmm. They had all of the cars and the clothes and the everything you can imagine, right? All the worldly things, all the materials. And I thought that was what success was. So I had been working in sales at that appliance and high-end audio store in the car audio. Like we sold $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, and higher car audio kind of full custom builds. And I was making good money. I didn't go to college. I was like, okay, I'm making, 60, 70, 80 grand at 20. So maybe I won't go to college. But that allure of the nightlife, right? And all of the forbidden things, the BMWs, the Ducatis and everything, they had it all. And I thought that was success. I thought that would bring me happiness. And I surrounded myself with completely the wrong types of people, and paid a big price for it.
Yeah, sounds like you learned that one the hard way.
I did.
I've been listening to this. I think it's a chapter from one of Grant Cardone's books. Mixed reviews on Grant Cardone, by the way. I do think he's got some good mindset. Don't agree with all of his philosophy on real estate, but who agrees with everything everybody else says? Like nobody. Right. So do like a lot of the stuff Grant puts out there. But he talks about being a control freak. He's like, I don't want leadership. I want control. And this like completely goes against kind of how I've thought about leadership my whole life and delegating and kind of trusting people. And it sounds like you gave people some trust early and got burned and kind of learned this lesson the hard way. What are your thoughts on leadership and the idea of it's okay to be a control freak, I guess, as a leader? Does that resonate with you?
So it brings up very strong feelings. Now, what I do today and what I primarily specialize in is these scientifically validated behavioral assessments, basically how we're hardwired and how everyone is hardwired differently out of the box. The ones I focus on, fun fact, if you Google personality assessment or behavioral assessment, there's like 800 different assessments on the market. The ones I use, there's only about a handful that are scientifically validated to be used, for what we call pre-hire and selection. But really what that means is that the data is reliable, repeatable, and stable over time. So coming back to your question about control, I would say Grant is probably wired in a specific way where that might work for him, but it doesn't work for everybody. And I learned this as I was getting into all of these assessments about now it's almost 10 years ago, right? Any coach who has a system to follow, where he tells you step by step what to do and how to do it, it really is only applicable to maybe 40% of the people. And then for the other 40% of the people, it's probably the exact opposite way they should approach something. And then there's the middle 20, which can kind of sway either way. Now, it doesn't mean there's not good principles embedded within there, but how we do things is unique to how we're wired, or how we should do things, how we should approach things. And control is one of those. Delegating authority versus delegating details, I can measure that with my assessments. And I can tell you who can delegate authority easily and who cannot, and then who can delegate details easily and who cannot. So it's a much like deeper, I guess, conversation to have around what's right for you, because we all kind of just stumble and fall and kind of like, you know, fail our way to becoming self-aware if you reflect a lot. And that's like a really messy, you know, dirty, messy process, painful process. But without objective kind of data that's reliable, repeatable, and stable over time, you really don't know how you operate. We're kind of just guessing, we're winging it, we're following other people who are successful,
right.
who we want to emulate. And sometimes it's not the right thing to do, even though you could follow the principles, but the how they do it is it might be a little different. And you don't want to get too caught up in having to do it their way, right?
Right. What are your go-to personality assessments?
So the two I use, because they are scientifically validated for hiring, are predictive index and Kolbe index. And those, so in the big brain model, there's 3 parts of the mind. The affective part of the mind, that's like the feeling, the emotions, motivating drives. That's predictive index. Then the cognitive, kind of like your computing power. You can look at IQ. There's many different dimensions of the cognitive piece, even how quickly you might learn in specific areas. Predictive index also covers that. And then there's this weird thing called the conative part of the mind, or volition. And only the Kolbe index measures that. And that is removing all of the kind of like the mask of the personality. And it's kind of like the how would you say it? It's like the operating system that runs underneath at all times. And the 3 parts of the mind are interacting and on at all times. It's not like just one is on and the other's off. Affective, cognitive, and conative. But the Kolbe with the conative measures how we solve problems when free to be ourselves. And it's kind of like a real unique type of assessment. The genesis of that assessment goes back 40 plus years. If you're familiar with Wonderlic, it's a cognitive assessment famous for like the NFL using it for quarterbacks. It's IQ, right? It's kind of like cognitive ability. Well, his daughter, Kathy Kolbe, was dyslexic and had learning disabilities. So she'd be sitting at the dinner table with her father, who developed this whole cognitive Wonderlic company and assessment. And she'd be like, Dad, you can't judge people based on their IQ and their ability to do things. Because look at me, like I can do things. I have some challenges in some areas, but in other areas, like I'm almost a genius, right? And he's like, look, this is my life's work. Like, if you want, go ahead and figure that out yourself. But just don't dive into my life's work. And that's what she did over 40 years ago. And she developed the Kolbe index conative theory, and it's been around forever. The cool thing about that is there's a 20-year ongoing study where the participants in that study who took the test over and over and over again within that 20 years, the results were 95% consistent. So it's really like who you are. It's who you've always been, and really who you always will be, which is, it's pretty amazing. But that's just one aspect of you. The affect and the cognitive come into play as well.
Right. See, I love this stuff. So where does like predictive index and Kolbe index, like when I've done stuff like Clifton Strengths or Jordan Peterson has like a personality test on like the
Big five.
the big five traits, right? Is any of that predictive index or Colby index like incorporated into that, or is that totally different?
Those are all the affect part of the mind, the
Okay.
affect part of the mind, affect.
Yeah.
Now, all of these assessments have gold that you can pull from them,
Sure.
but not all of them have results that are repeatable over time. So, like their assessments are a bit more of a snapshot, but they can change test over test.
Right.
Even if, like, you take that, I don't know, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, DISC, it tells you, like, don't take this if you haven't eaten or if you're going to be interrupted. And there's like this big rule list, right? Like, okay, well, you got to be like in this perfect state to be able to take it. And that's because it's all based on emotion, right? And how you feel. And if you are swayed by how you feel, then your results could change over time. And if you're going to make important decisions based on people data, you'd want data that doesn't change over time.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Makes sense. It's interesting. I've gotten a lot of value from understanding myself better, I guess I'll say, for lack of a better way to say it. But I think a lot of times we grow up in an environment, and correct me if you have other thoughts on this, or expound if you agree. I just feel like we operate in an environment of pressure where we're constantly like trying to live up to what other people think we are supposed to be in their mind versus who we truly want to be. And I think part of the reason we do that is we don't know how to communicate it. At least this is what I found in my life is the times I've tried to stand up and be the real Phil Swanson that I think I really am. It's always in a heightened state of emotion. I'm typically like angry or something's like kind of tick me off. And I finally like stand up for myself, but I don't do it in the right way, or I do it in a way where later I'm like, oh crap, I look like a jerk right there. As opposed to, really understanding maybe why I feel that way and being able to communicate it in a way that's loving and truthful and not harmful to a relationship. Am I way off there, or what are your thoughts on, how just communication skills and self-awareness play into, being the real you?
Yeah. I mean, I think self-awareness might be the most important trait for a human being, and especially for a leader. Again, you have to be reflective, and it takes a long time to kind of learn about yourself, and that's only if you are self-reflective. I look back at some of the most catastrophic mistakes that I've made in life, and they were always made from a very high or low state of emotion. Terrible decisions, or terrible place to make it a very important decision from. And it was this pattern that I kept kind of repeating because I wasn't self-aware, right? But I think kind of through the process of understanding yourself, being self-reflective, I think that, for me, I was able to really adjust the way I did things. And you learn, you grow, you mature, you age. I'm 43 now. So I've earned some of the wisdom that I have, and it wasn't from reading a book. It was from completely making mistakes, feeling the pain of it, and saying, I never want that to happen again. How do I avoid that? Right.
Yeah. Are you a Chicago boy?
I'm from Chicago, but I live in Savannah, Georgia now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I was born just north of Naperville.
Oh, get out of here. Okay, I'm from like Park Ridge, Evanston.
There you go. There you go. So Chicago born, but now I'm down in Houston, which, it's a good city, but it's just ugly, Brian. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Houstonians. When your drainage ditch through the middle of town is your claim to fame, that's when you know your city is ugly. But we got good food down here and good people. So
that's good. I've been there a couple times. I do like Savannah. So it's very small. It's nothing like Chicago. There's, Houston has a ton of stuff to do. Savannah has next to nothing to do, comparatively speaking. But, I have a 9-year-old and 6-year-old daughter. We moved 3 years ago. So they were 6 and 3. And I was kind of thinking about, what environment do I want to raise my children in? Right. And it was, the year of COVID really kind of I opened up my wife and my own eyes to say, well, maybe we can do it differently than what we've been doing. And now is the opportunity to be able to do it because the kids are so young, they won't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great, man. I love it. So I'm going on I am a dual girl dad as well. Got my second
Okay.
on the way.
Nice.
I got a 3-year-old.
Okay.
So let's talk about fatherhood. Let's talk about fatherhood. How did you transition into being a girl dad? And what are some of your lessons learned through that process?
Yeah. So we got pregnant during the gym years and kind of like after the leaving of the big paying corporate job and the gym was something I forced onto my wife. And another kind of lesson that I learned there was just because somebody's a little bit more organized than you. I'm a classic like visionary, big picture, details, like just, my eyes gloss over kind of thing. But just because somebody's a little bit more organized than you doesn't mean they should be a general manager or they should handle all the details, right? And that's kind of the position I put my wife into. And I really just kind of like robbed her of all of the joy that she had in her life by forcing her to play a position that she didn't want and she wasn't wired for. Of course, at the time, I didn't know that because I didn't know about all of the personality type of assessments.
Sure.
But, it was something that I was able to learn in retrospect and then go back and fix and apply. But the whole fatherhood thing, we got pregnant during that gym time period. And now I was trying to build this massive company, this massive gym. We were hiring, we were expanding, growing rapidly. And I was pouring my heart and soul into the gym because my identity was I left this massively high paying job to do this gym thing. It better pay well. It better pay off, right? From a financial perspective.
Sure.
And so I put the mask of the provider on, but it was kind of like the provider at all costs. Like, and me and my wife began to kind of actually grow apart after we had our first child. She kind of stepped back from the gym. And, here I am, I'm like, oh my God, like now the only organized person in the whole gym that was helping with all the back end. I'm like, it's making you miserable. Go ahead and just be a mom, please. And I didn't have anybody for that. Right. So I was kind of wearing both hats and I was very stressed. And I was out of my zone of genius because I went from this visionary who was making, I was doing well with what I was doing. Then I went into the whole GM manager integrator role, and it really took me out of my own strengths. So that period was terrible. I was a terrible father. I was a terrible husband overall. And our marriage was not great, right? But it was all like in the guise of like, I didn't understand why she didn't get what I was doing for the family as a provider and all of the sacrifices I was making. And on her end, after, we've obviously have a great relationship now. But on her end, she didn't really quite see the struggles that I was going through either. And we weren't really communicating and we just kept kind of growing apart. And, it kind of just came to a head where it was going to be one or the other in a sense. And I did choose, we had another daughter, younger daughter. And it was after that point where I was like, okay, this is not going to work. It's just, I'm a terrible dad. I'm a terrible husband. I knew it inside and out. And having another child, I was just like, okay, the gym thing's got to end. Otherwise, the marriage is going to end eventually, and not by my own choice. So I chose the family instead of the gym and decided to part ways with it, sell it. We prepared to sell it. We did really well with the sale. I stopped doing the business coaching for gyms. I kind of just closed that whole chapter. And that was January of 2020, right before yeah.
Good timing, huh? I bet you were pretty glad you sold that gym.
It was incredible timing. And I think God had a hand in helping kind of put the pieces together. Like there's no other way to describe it, but many different things had to happen for us to have a successful sale in the gym. I don't know if you're familiar with CrossFit gyms, but they're very difficult to sell and they're very difficult to sell profitably because usually you're the star of the show, right? The CrossFit gym owner is the business and the personality behind the business, and all the members love that person. And if that person leaves, it all goes to crap, right? But God just moved the right people into place. It was another gym that wanted to expand and had a member base, and we had just downsized where we cut a huge portion of our overhead down right before the sale, which increased the value. And it just, I couldn't have mapped out a better scenario for it.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you kind of went through forcing your wife into positions where she wasn't a good fit. And I feel like this is one of the biggest challenges that business owners have, is getting people in the right seats on the bus, right? Good to great sort of stuff. Why do you think there's that? I mean, is it literally just a lack of awareness of what people's strengths are, or a lack of caring, or why do businesses find it so hard to get people in the right seats on the bus when, I don't know, sometimes to potentially low-level employees, like I feel like they can see obviously like this person's not the right skill set for this job, and so they're like all confused about it. Why do you think that is from your experience?
I really don't think it's from a lack of caring. I actually wrote a book, How to Succeed in Spite of Yourself, and it's literally about everything that we're about to talk about. It is a lack of awareness, a lack of self-awareness, number one, a lack of awareness of other people's strengths. I think that a lot of good leaders see the potential in other people that those people might not see in themselves. And they just assume that if you give the person the right opportunity, they're going to rise to the occasion. And that doesn't always happen. In fact, I opened a second gym with that exact mindset for a good human being. He was a coach at the time, opened a second location, brand new, all new equipment, big, a lot of money. And for me, I wanted something for him more than he wanted for himself. I put up all the money. He was going to have to put up kind of the sweat of what I had to do to build gym number one.
Sure.
And he said all the right things, made all the right promises. I didn't have what he needed, and he didn't have what I needed to make that work, right? And it was something that probably could have been avoided. I think there was definitely red flags, but I saw the potential in him, and he had the potential to be like the guy and do really well. He had that personality. He's kind of like a mirror of everywhere he goes, but he just didn't see it in himself. And with that opportunity, he kind of shrank down, and he became depressed because he wasn't performing, and it was kind of a big mess, and we had to sell it at a huge loss. That was the second gym. And that was during the stint of the whole gym. But that was where I was like, wow, I got to learn, like something's going on. Either all these people keep failing me or I'm failing them. And that big look in the mirror, and that's what the book's about. It's like, they can't all be stupid and they can't all be failing me. Like, it's probably me that doesn't understand something. And that's where I really got into these behavioral assessments. Like, I needed to be able to explain what I did really well and articulate it, because they expected me to be both the integrator and the visionary. But I could do it, but I couldn't do it well over a long period of time. And even if I could, it literally drained all of the energy out of me completely. So I was being suffocated by it. And then I didn't realize that I was also suffocating everybody else by putting them into positions that they weren't really ready for or wired for. And that was the beginning of that whole, like, oh, there was a book that I read called, it's Rocket Fuel, the visionary,
I like that book,
and the integrator. And when I read that, that was like the beginning of my journey there. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so simple. And I found the Colby and predictive index at that time, and it just all made sense. But I had to go through that pain for it to be that big of a aha. Otherwise, it just would have been like, I talk to business owners all the time, and they're like, "Oh, that's cool." Like, what do you mean it's cool? Like, this could save your life, literally. Like, but they haven't experienced the pain yet, right? You have to experience the pain to really value what it could do.
100%. 100%. I like that book. So you're the visionary, huh?
I'm a pure visionary. I have no business doing anything other than that and leading. And I'm kind of like a architect, like a solution architect almost. But I can't do it, right?
Right. Yeah. You know what's interesting? I've thought about this a lot because when I read that book, I struggled to identify whether I was visionary or operational, or I can't remember what they called the other one. Integrator. Yeah. Or like a combo. Which I know are very, very rare, right?
Yeah.
But I think the reason is you're still kind of at different stages of life, like you were early in some of your businesses, right? You were operating, right? Even though you didn't like it, and that wasn't where you really shine, and those weren't your strengths. I almost feel like the visionaries, all the visionaries, the Alex Hormozis, the Elon Musk, like every visionary type of leader that probably thrives in that still had to pay their dues as an operator. Or is that a crazy thought?
Yeah, and I think it is kind of like you have to know that you shouldn't be doing it. And the only way to know you shouldn't be doing it is to do it. You know what I mean? And if you're early in business, you have to bootstrap. Yeah, you might have to do everything. You might have to be the GM and the visionary. But to really get the most out of your potential, you should just race to get out of whatever you shouldn't be doing, right? Make the list. We call it love and loathe, right? The stuff that you light up while doing, that gives you energy, versus the stuff that drains you. And it's very simple, just kind of using that on a monthly or quarterly basis. And then all the stuff you loathe, find a way to delegate that. And then double down on what you do really well, that you light up well. But also make sure that you're not delegating that to people who aren't wired for it, that they also loathe it, right? Because that's the lesson I learned as well. It's like it's not fair to pass off your hell to somebody else.
Right.
You have to make sure, okay, do you like doing this? Like, you sure? Let's figure this out.
Right. So what's your kind of switching gears here? What's your faith story? I was raised lifelong Christian. How did you become a Christian, Brian?
So I grew up Catholic, went to Catholic school. My mom was half Italian, half Polish, so super Catholic.
Yeah.
It's like the most Catholic you can get out of maybe Mexicans as well.
Yeah, there you go.
But my dad was an atheist, and there was always this kind of like, I just didn't understand, like, he just didn't believe in God, but he did it for the family. Like, he'd go to church on Sundays and send us to private school because public schools basically were terrible at the time. And I don't know, it was just something about that. I think a lot about how I ended up where I'm about to tell you where I ended up. But just not having my dad believe in it kind of really made me question a lot of things. And then seeing the hypocrisy in the church, and not really having a good male model to be able to answer my questions, because I'm a very inquisitive type of person, and I like to know the truth. And if I don't have somebody to ask that, I'll kind of just make up my own based on what I'm observing. So all of that to say, I think I kind of just got, I grew into a young man, teenager, and I just kind of like threw away religion. And I'm like, okay, well, how can all of these other people be wrong? Like, how could Buddhism be wrong and Hinduism be wrong? And I really grew up in like a very diverse kind of area. And then I got into high school, and it was like super diverse. And that was kind of like the beginning of me walking away from God and shutting God out. And it just kind of, led to me drifting so far that when I did meet the group of friends who had all the stuff, right? They were the bad role models for me. and they kind of, it's not their fault. It's my fault completely. But somehow I just didn't have a strong foundation and relationship with God, where I just kind of like easily drifted there. And it didn't start big. It just started small. And then little by little, year by year, I'm like, oh my God, I'm way off track. And, that kind of led me to the point where I was, owning my own restaurant and bar. And you can imagine what all comes with that. And I was doing nightclub promoting and seeing that whole kind of lifestyle, doing all the bad things that you can imagine. When the restaurant thing really went under for me, I became completely nihilistic. Even though I wasn't really being a good person or doing good things, like I couldn't believe that happened to me, because I thought, how can that happen to a good person? In my mind, I thought I was a good person. I might have been doing bad things, but I thought I was a good person, and they were the bad people, right?
Right.
So a lot of resentment, a lot of just kind of, honestly, I wouldn't say hate, but just I was just in a very bad place. And so I became pretty like nihilistic. I started partying and doing drugs and, all the fun party drugs, and just really like to a point wanting to test how far I can push it. And if I did die, I didn't care at that point. It was like a huge depression. I was in the hole, a couple 100,000. I was 23. How am I ever going to dig myself out of this, right? Kind of thing. And it was just a really, really dark time. And it was years of darkness. It wasn't just like a month or something like that, right? So during that period, I remember my sister she's going to get married. She's older, a little older, 4 years older. And this was during my darkest, most irresponsible, I was a useless human being, nightclub promoter at like 25, or, probably just younger than 25. And she says, Brian, I want you to go find a guy and a girl singer to sing at my wedding, Andre Bocelli, the prayer. And it was like one responsibility that she gave me. And I don't know why she trusted me with that. And I'm like, oh, great. I know a bunch of singers. Like I had a really good guy singer. And I was at the nightclub one night, the nightclub that I promoted at. And I was introduced to a girl, and through a mutual friend. And I was completely out of my mind, probably on all the drugs and drinking. And you can imagine what that lifestyle involved. And she introduced me to this girl, and I was like, wow, she's like beautiful. And I heard she could sing. So being as irresponsible as you can be, I'm like, maybe I should hire her. Sounds like a good idea. I'd never heard her sing. And we ended up kind of talking through text. I'm like, you want to sing at my sister's wedding? I'm like, I asked my mutual friend, I'm like, are you sure she can sing? She's like, yeah, she's good. Just hire her. So I ended up hiring her. But during that kind of time between when I hired her and the wedding, I remember going, driving to the nightclub. I had like a bag full of bad stuff in my pocket. And just something came over me where we were kind of already chatting. We had maybe met once or twice. And for some reason, my radio at the time on the way to the nightclub was set on like Light FM, which was playing gospel music. And it was Smokey Norfolk, the song I Understand. Oh, this thing always comes on. Let me see if I can get rid of that. There we go. Smokey Norfolk, the song I Understand. It's a gospel song. And I remember just being overwhelmed with emotion. And I threw the bad stuff out the window. And I just kind of like surrendered and submitted to God. But it wasn't like I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
But I knew I needed help at the time. I was just, I was a shell of a human being, like just raw of emotion. Just, I didn't have anything. And I believe God put her in my life to, change my trajectory a little bit. Wow. And it did. But so, that's the beginning of kind of the transformation. But sad to say is I didn't really quite, I would say I didn't really quite get it. I surrendered. He saved me. I didn't know what I did. He corrected my life and kind of, he helped me quite a bit. She helped me quite a bit as well. But then my ego kind of got in the way. And this was during the CDW / gym era, where I started getting into personal development, which is ripe with new agey, secret type of stuff. And I really kind of like got into all of that. And I thought that whole era of success, from doing the corporate job, making a ton of money, coming from basically a shell of a human being to that, and then doing the gym and that being successful, I thought I did that. And I was pretty proud of myself for doing it, unfortunately. And it was that second gym and my relationship almost crumbling, and me betting almost everything I had on that second gym and that coach, and having that fall apart, that brought me to my knees again. And I think that was what really stuck. So I was so stubborn the first time. I could have had that years earlier, but it took two terrible, I would say, experiences to really make that stick. And that was the beginning of my journey back. And really, I didn't come back to Christ and accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior and be baptized until about 2 years ago in Savannah.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So, yeah, you got my wheel spinning. So, I think one of the reasons a lot of the stuff you share faith-based on Facebook resonates with me is because of your comment about kind of going down the new age path. And this is it's been one of my major focuses when I'm putting out content is, how do I get people to go back to the truth? And it's really easy to read, Napoleon Hill's, the classic personal development type of books. And there's a lot of truth in there, but then it's mixed in with some things that just aren't, they got that new age spin to it, and they kind of take it to a place that's not biblical. And how did your study practice, like, how did you come to see that as well? Because it's so interesting, because it seems like not many people make that connection.
Just seeing, I think it was almost like my lens shifted, and it was all in front of me before, but at some point my lens just shifted, and I saw the deception and hiding, a nugget of truth, a sliver of truth in lies, but just kind of getting you hooked and kind of off trajectory a little bit. And I think we long for the truth. And when we hear it and see it, we kind of know it. And I think they know that. So they throw that truth in there to then kind of just again, it's like an asteroid, right? If an asteroid is going this way, if you just tip it off trajectory a little bit, it's going to end off way off course by the time it gets, light years away. And that's kind of what the enemy does. It's all right, I'll give you a little bit of the truth, but I'm going to lead you so far away from God that you won't even recognize it by the time you get there. And I think I was really mad that I fell for it, to be honest. Like all the gurus, I was like obsessed with Sadhguru, just all that stuff. I was like really into theosophy, perennialism. I don't know, but I was always seeking the truth.
Yeah.
And I was just in the wrong place. And I do believe God used many different things to lead me back to him. But I think it was because I was genuinely seeking the truth, even though I was completely deceived. It was that genuine seeking, and then continuing to say, okay, God, I can't do this by myself anymore. Again, I talk about the two major times, and really those 2 times that brought me to my knees. I don't know. It's just, once you see it, you can't unsee it. 2020 really helped open my eyes as well.
Right. Yeah. What a blessing, right?
It really was. And it was terrible what happened.
Yeah.
But I think you just, they're doing this. Like, they're saying this, but wait a minute, what's going on behind the surface? And I have like good pattern recognition. I believe I have pretty good discernment now, but I believe that came a lot from not having good discernment for so long, that I see it everywhere now, right? Like Taylor Swift music and this and that. And I have to be careful because I'm pretty like objective about it and emotionless, but I like to point out untruths. But I just have to make sure that spirit of pointing out untruths comes from a place of love too. They're all being deceived, just like probably in one area of my life, I'm probably still being deceived in some aspects, right? So it's like we're all victims of being deceived by the enemy. And it's not people, it's powers and principalities working through these people who probably don't know, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think to that point, I heard I was just listening to a Jordan Peterson podcast recently where he was talking with Sean Ryan on his show about the truth being important, but you also don't want to beat the people over the head with the truth like a club, right? And I encounter a lot of people kind of in that whole truther community where that's kind of their vibe, right? They're like they're just blasting stuff out there and beating people over the head with a club, thinking they're doing God's work, spreading the truth. Maybe they are, I don't know. I struggle with it. The way we communicate matters. Obviously, you got to do it in love and with the best intention. But yeah, I think that's something I see a lot, Brian.
I've been guilty of that for sure, and it's something I'm trying to be, even to this day, more aware of. And I'm not perfect by any means.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
but
same here.
Yeah, it's really easy to beat people over the head with the truth, but to do it with
it's
love.
Fun sometimes. Let's be real, Brian. It's fun,
right? Right. But a lot of it is ego too. Like, look at what I know.
Right. That's right.
Like, how don't you know this, dummy? Right? Like, it's like one of those things.
Yeah.
So I'm careful that I'm doing it from a place of understanding and love, but I'm not perfect by any means. I think we could all do a much better job of that. But at the same time, if your boat is basically on a river that's about to go over a cliff, and you're saying there is no cliff, don't worry about it, or that's just a conspiracy theory, you're like, okay, what do I do?
Yeah, right. What is the loving thing to do in that instance, right?
Right. I mean, think about like society and where we're at now with tolerance, right? Like tolerance isn't love. Love is not letting people do things that will harm them, right? Tolerating things that will cause harm to people you love is not love.
That's right. 100%. 100%. Well, Brian, this has been fun, man. We're gonna have you back. We could talk forever. And before I ask you the last question, I'm gonna take a risk here and ask you one that who knows where it'll go.
Okay.
But a lot of truther topics out there. What are some of your favorites that you would encourage people to seek out right now, as far as any sort of truther type of topics in the world? What do people need to be questioning these days?
Oh boy.
You don't have to say all of them. Just, what are like your top 3 right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the obvious one and probably the most controversial one is just looking at who you can and cannot criticize. And I'll probably leave it at that. But whoever you cannot criticize probably has some level of ownership and authority over you. And that's the scary thing. It's wild. Biblically speaking, I can't say I have read the Bible when I was younger, but I've read it through and through now. And I believe that the timeline is accurate, and it makes sense in the way that things probably won't get better. They're probably going to get much worse before they get better.
Sure.
And if you're expecting things to get better, or if you're expecting somebody to come save you,
Right.
whether it's a politician or an organization or anything, you're probably not going to be happy with what might transpire in the next 1 decade, 2 decades. Nobody knows the time or the hour, but it feels like it's close.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I worry when people think there's like this orange man that's going to come save them.
Yeah.
Not that I don't agree with maybe some things that are happening, but I have these like warning signs up, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you hear about this white hat movement and all this stuff going on, and don't worry, the military's in control. And you're just kind of like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe.
I mean, I think they're masters of controlled opposition. And I think we're playing checkers and they're playing chess. They plan by the century, we plan by the day or week, right? It's like we're not playing the same game at all. So you're right. When certain people of certain parties speak, any party, I look at it through a lens of discernment, and I do feel the red flags go up, and probably a little too often. But I think a lot of times people just want a savior. They just want to not worry about all this, and they just want to know that somebody's taking care of it, right?
Right.
Like, all right, well, somebody's taking care of it. And I do believe that, unfortunately, that could have been an incredibly intelligent psyop to keep people disarmed and occupied long enough for them to do what they had to do. Possible. I'll entertain anything, really.
Yeah. I don't honestly. That doesn't sound like a crazy concept. And
right.
I even hear people like Jordan Peterson. I've gotten a lot of value from that guy and a lot of the stuff he shared. And one thing I've noticed in because he like dabbles in Christian concepts now, and kind of from a worldly perspective in his psychology training, but he never quite gets to the gospel ever in anything he says. And so, it's like red flags. Like, okay, very wise guy, knows a lot about a lot, but I never hear him land at Jesus saves you from your sin. Speaking of, we all need a savior. We already have one,
right.
But he always lands at you sacrificing, you doing stuff, making a law of more things you have to do to redeem yourself, as opposed to the true, pure gospel. And so that, as far as like controlled opposition goes, it makes me even question, some of the big influencers in the movement that seem so good, that, is it just a grain of truth that doesn't quite get people to where they need to be? So I think about that a lot.
Yeah, and I see it in a lot of the main individuals that people on what you would call maybe the right side or the conservative side.
Sure.
I think they're just siding with whatever makes them feel comfortable and good and not worried. But just
Well, Brian, this has been fun, man. Hey, got to ask you the last question. When I started the podcast, I thought, wow, how cool would it be to be able to listen to conversations of my great-great-grandfather talking to cool people, 100 years ago plus. And, I may only have one photograph of the guy. And now we have an opportunity to where our future generations are going to see, hours and hours of conversations and thoughts about what was going on in the world from their great Grandpa Brian and, great Grandpa Phil. So
Yeah.
with that perspective in mind, what would you want to leave those future generations with today?
I think it's the hardest thing to do in terms of being of this world and living in this world and being set apart. But the truth is in the gospel and in the Bible, and it is the roadmap that has been left for us by God to follow and to live in and to read. It's a living kind of document, and you don't have to chase all of the gurus, and you don't have to read 80 different books. The answers really could be all found there if you allow it, and you can save yourself a lot of heartache and time if you do just trust that. And that's what I'm trying to raise my two little daughters to do, and prepare them for the world, which is, it's everything about the world is going to try to take them and lead them away from God. And that book, the Bible, the gospel, the Old Testament, the New Testament, that has everything that I was searching for when I was lost could have been found there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love it. Amen, brother. Brian, thanks for coming on, man. This has been great. Y'all, if you're not following Brian Alexander, go check him out on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and go get a copy of his book. What is that book called again? Let's see. How to Succeed in Spite of Yourself. Is that it?
That's right. Yep. All about leadership through self-awareness.
Yeah, super cool. So go give Brian a follow. Don't forget to share the show as you go. Lead everything.